season for the Philadelphia 76ers is already a failure. Joel Embiid has to be tired. And before he goes public and end up forcing his way out of Philly, I will blow it up now to save myself a headache. Blow the whole thing up right now.
The Philadelphia 76ers are in a never-ending nightmare that just somehow, someway continues to get worse. And the latest turn in the saga just made it seem like not only could they lose one of their stars, but they could lose the defending MVP. As a matter of fact, it looks like it's very likely that they will lose the defending MVP. So we're gonna get to all of that, man. Before we get to the content, we're about to run a huge giveaway for NBA 2K24 on my Twitter account, on my Instagram, and on my Snapchat. It's at TheFlightMike on Twitter and Instagram, and FlightMike Snap on Snapchat. Now that we get all that out of the way, cue the intro. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? Lost amongst this whole James Harden situation is truly the history of ineptitude for the Philadelphia 76ers organization, going all the way back to the 2013 season, where they decided to trade their 21-year-old all-star point guard just so they could tank. What did they do with that pick? Well, they selected Nerlens Noel. 76ers fans were really confused about what was going on, so they dubbed the entire era the process and told their fans to trust the process. In the 2014 NBA draft, they drafted two players that made the organization feel even more pessimistic, selecting Joel Embiid with the number 3 overall pick and trading for the rights to Dario Saric. Both of these players ended up being great players in the NBA. Problem was they couldn't play at the time. The message was conveyed once again, trust the process. But in 2015, for the third straight year in a row, the Philadelphia 76ers drafted yet another center, this time being Jahlil Okafor. And at that point, we were just wondering, what the hell are you guys doing? 3 centers being selected with top 5 picks in the NBA draft in the modern NBA is insanity, especially when one of those NBA drafts featured the likes of Devin Booker, who would have been a remarkable complementary piece to build around moving into the future. But it would just get worse and worse. Following this, the Philadelphia 76ers would decide that they should hire their advisor's son to run the team. And then, right when there was some optimism in the form of Ben Simmons joining the Philadelphia 76ers and Joel Embiid looking really good in his limited time with the Sixers, the 76ers decided to go all in, trading up from number 3 overall to number 1 overall to select Markelle Fultz, which on paper seemed like a brilliant idea. Markelle Fultz was a do-it-all guard. He could play on the ball, he could play off of the ball, he had no problem scoring in college, and he had tremendous defensive versatility. But for some reason, the moment the 76ers drafted him, he quite literally forgot how to shoot a basketball. I'm not going to go into specifics of that situation because it gets crazier from here. In 2018, the general manager of the Philadelphia 76ers would quite literally trash Joel Embiid on Twitter using burner accounts. And then at this point, they said enough is enough. Let's bring in a brand new general manager, Elton Brand. What did Elton Brand do immediately? Well, he traded away Markelle Fultz, which really frustrated Sixers fans that believe they gave up on Fultz way too quickly. But he brought in Jimmy Butler, so all was forgiven. Problem was, he brought in Jimmy Butler for quite literally less than a season and decided to keep Tobias Harris as opposed to Jimmy Butler. At this point, the problems were clear. The reason why the Sixers weren't contending was of course because of their head coach, Brett Brown. He wasn't doing his job right, so they fired him, then hired Doc Rivers, and then they decided to bring in Daryl Morey. 1 year later, Ben Simmons demands a trade. The next year, they get investigated for tampering, and now James Harden has demanded a trade. And this is a player who quite literally became a star because of Daryl Morey. In our previous video, we talked about how James Harden went all the way to China to agree with China that he himself dislikes Daryl Morey as well. Watch.
Daryl Morey is a liar, and I will never be a part of an organization that he's a part of.
And since then, there was a lot of speculation as to why James Harden would be so frustrated. Many people speculated that he felt like he was owed a max contract as a result of taking a pay cut with the Philadelphia 76ers the year prior. And if you listen to his interviews, it seems like that's what James Harden is alluding to.
Do you have an open line of communication with the 76ers, and how much patience do you need to have to let this play out?
I'm been patient all summer, so for me it's just focus on what I can control, and that's working out, staying in shape, and getting ready for a good season.
Too late to repair the relationship?
I think so.
So now the Sixers are in a stalemate with James Harden. Originally, he opted in for the Sixers to trade him to a different team, ideally the Los Angeles Clippers. But now that it doesn't seem likely that the Sixers could make such a trade, James Harden has declared war. And according to Woj, it seems like James Harden already has a plan.
Is to make the Sixers so uncomfortable that they just decide that they cannot bring him back to training camp, and they do a trade.
And I guess you could also double down on this because James Harden even posted this onto his Instagram story, a picture of him looking at a fat suit. So that means the fat suit is coming. But at the same time, you need to understand that the agreement that Daryl Morey had with James Harden, at least in terms of the NBA, is not legal. You're not allowed to go to your player and say, hey, you take a pay cut now, and next year I'll pay you a max contract. And upon that handshake agreement not being fulfilled, you can't create a huge commotion off of these behind the back, under the table deals. So I believe that the latest report we're getting on this is to make sure that both Harden and Morey don't get into a situation like the Minnesota Timberwolves got into with Joe Smith over 20 years ago. For those of you guys that don't know, following the 1999 to 2000 season, Joe Smith and Glenn Taylor, the Minnesota Timberwolves owner, were caught in a salary cap evading scandal that also involved general manager Kevin McHale. Smith was allegedly promised a future multi-million-dollar deal if he signed with the team for below market value. That way, the team could make additional moves in the short term. Sounds very familiar. The deal was that Joe Smith was going to sign 3 one-year contracts for less than $3 million apiece, and at the end of the last one-year contract, Smith would sign a new long-term contract that would pay him as much as $86 million. When David Stern found out about this, he stripped the Minnesota Timberwolves of their first-round picks in 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, and 2005, although the 03 and 05 picks would get returned to them. But for the most part, you could agree, this sounds like the exact same thing. So it's kind of fishy that Shams Charania is coming out and saying this today. As part of the NBA probe into his liar comment, James Harden told league investigators that he was referring to Daryl Morey, telling Harden he will trade him quickly following the $35.6 million opt-in for 2023 to 2024. 76ers stance now is that they expect to keep Harden. Now at this point you might be wondering, okay Mike, well where does Joel Embiid factor into this? If you're Joel Embiid, you've already overcome so many obstacles with the Philadelphia 76ers, whether it was the rocky start to your NBA career, to Markelle Fultz forgetting how to shoot, to Ben Simmons demanding a trade, and now James Harden demanding a trade. At a specific point you have to think to yourself that there is a common denominator here, and it's the fact that your organization isn't capable of retaining its stars or developing its players to its fullest potential, or putting around good pieces around you to compete. And a month ago, we began to get some glimpses of this when Joel Embiid would say this in regards to his career and his future.
I just want to win a championship. Whatever it takes. I don't know what that's going to be, whether it's in Philly or, everywhere else. I just want to have a chance to accomplish that. I want to see what it feels like to win that first one and then think about, the next one.
Immediately upon this coming out, it seems like PR teams started to scramble, saying things like Joel Embiid wants a Kobe Bryant-like career to stay with one franchise just to cause less panic. And although things subsided for a little bit because we were more focused on what's happening with James Harden, Joel Embiid would then go on to Twitter and would change his location from Philadelphia and will also remove processing from his Twitter bio. Now, you guys know how I feel about occasions like this. When something happens for the first time, like say Joel Embiid says he could see himself playing somewhere else in his career, I'll let it go. But whenever you see multiple instances of things like this happening, it's not a coincidence. And there are many more things that suggest that Joel Embiid will want to leave. I mean, forget the fact that the Philadelphia 76ers have been very shady and how they're trying to pivot the fact that James Harden isn't upset about not getting a max contract extension, but rather he's upset about the fact that Daryl Morey told him he'll get traded quickly after he opted in. Which, James, if you don't trust your general manager, why would you trust him and opt in at that point as opposed to opting out and signing somewhere else in free agency? Could it be because you didn't think there was a market for yourself? Kind of like what Kyrie Irving experienced last year? I don't necessarily know. But currently, NBA insiders believe that Joel Embiid is the most likely NBA superstar to ask for a trade next. If you just take a look at the signs, it's very obvious. So what is the most likely location for Joel Embiid? Well, the market for him is sure to be robust. For one, any team with a plethora of assets is obviously going to be in the mix to acquire him. So teams like the Houston Rockets, if they decide not to develop their homegrown talent and they want to package some of those young players to bring in Joel Embiid, that's on the table. A team like the Miami Heat that could package Bam Adebayo with Tyler Hero and some draft picks is always going to be a player for Joel Embiid's services. But no other team is more likely to get Joel Embiid than the New York Knicks. We talked about this so many times in the past. The Knicks general manager, Leon Rose, has a history with Joel Embiid. He used to represent Joel Embiid as an agent. The New York Knicks, although they're not necessarily a contender on paper, play in a large market and have been making very savvy moves in the front office. Signing Jalen Brunson to that contract last year was without a doubt the best move of free agency. There's finally stability in New York. And the icing on the cake is none other than Joel Embiid's wedding being attended by Knicks president Leon Rose and executive vice president William Wesley. So it seems like all sides are pointing towards Joel Embiid eventually demanding a trade from the Philadelphia 76ers. If you're a Sixers fan, this isn't necessarily the worst thing ever. The worst thing ever would be losing your stars for nothing. Trading a defending MVP for a plethora of assets and a former MVP for even more assets to build around Tyrese Maxey and focusing all of your efforts into developing Tyrese Maxey isn't the worst strategy, because it's clear that going into this season at this point, we all could agree on one thing. There is no chance that the Philadelphia 76ers are NBA championship contenders in the East. There's no way this team can beat the Boston Celtics, the Miami Heat, assuming the Miami Heat get Damian Lillard, the Milwaukee Bucks, or even the Cleveland Cavaliers. Well, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.